The crystal chandeliers of the Beverly Hills Hotel's grand ballroom cast dancing light across 500 of Silicon Valley's most influential faces. I smoothed my custom Valentino gown, the deep emerald silk worth more than most people's cars, and checked my phone one final time. The notification made me smile. Another tech acquisition completed. Another $50 million added to my portfolio. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Tonight was the annual Tech Vision Awards, where the industry's elite gathered to celebrate innovation and success. I belonged here now, at Table 1, reserved for the evening's major honorees. The irony wasn't lost on me that 3 years ago, I couldn't afford the cheapest ticket to this event. Through the crowd of venture capitalists and startup founders, I spotted him, Marcus Chen, looking uncomfortable in a rented tuxedo that didn't quite fit his shoulders. He was seated at table 47, near the back, scanning the room with the desperate energy of someone trying to network his way out of failure. He hadn't seen me yet. Too busy trying to catch the attention of investors who no longer returned his calls. His once confident posture had been replaced by the hunched shoulders of a man carrying too much debt and too little hope. Miss Blackwood, my assistant Jennifer, appeared beside me, tablet in hand. The Wall Street Journal wants to confirm the details for tomorrow's cover story. Should I tell them you're ready to discuss the Morrison buyout? I nodded, watching Marcus finally notice the large screens displaying tonight's nominees. His face went through a familiar sequence of emotions when he saw my name. Surprise, then recognition, then something that looked like physical pain. "Tell them I'll have a statement after the ceremony," I replied, never taking my eyes off the man who once told me I'd never amount to anything without him. The memories tried to surface, but I pushed them down. Tonight wasn't about the past. It was about celebrating how far I'd traveled, from that broken girl who'd cried herself to sleep in a studio apartment, wondering if she'd ever be enough for anyone. Marcus's current wife, Vivian, sat beside him in a dress that screamed expensive but looked somehow desperate. Her jewelry was real, but her smile was strained. The Chen family had been hemorrhaging money for 2 years now, ever since Marcus's crypto startup collapsed and took their investors' funds with it. The irony was delicious. He'd left me for her money, her family's connections, her trust fund that promised security. Now that same trust fund was nearly empty, drained by his failed ventures and lavish lifestyle that he'd never learned to abandon. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC's voice filled the ballroom. "Welcome to the 15th Annual Tech Vision Awards, celebrating the visionaries who shape our digital future." I took my seat, feeling the weight of 3 years' worth of 18-hour days of building something from nothing while everyone counted me out. The table around me was filled with industry legends, CEOs of companies that had changed the world. They treated me as an equal now, but I remember when their assistants wouldn't return my calls. The first awards were predictable. Innovation in artificial intelligence went to a Stanford startup that raised $200 million in Series B funding. Breakthrough mobile technology went to a company that would probably be acquired by Apple within the year. Marcus wasn't nominated for anything. His name hadn't appeared in tech publications for months, except in articles about failed entrepreneurs and cautionary tales about cryptocurrency gambling. "The next award," the MC continued, "recognizes an individual whose vision and determination have fundamentally altered the venture capital landscape." My phone buzzed quietly. A text from my financial advisor. The Peterson acquisition had gone through. My net worth had just crossed $400 million. I was officially one of the youngest female billionaires in tech, and the only one who'd built her fortune entirely from scratch.
Through my peripheral vision, I saw Marcus lean forward, probably hoping against hope that somehow his name would be called for something, anything that might salvage his reputation. This year's recipient didn't just build a successful company, the MC's voice carried across the silent ballroom. She revolutionized how we think about tech investing, proving that the best opportunities often come from the most unexpected places. I could feel the anticipation building at my table. My fellow nominees knew what was coming. The past month had been filled with speculation about who would win the Visionary Investor Award. My name had been mentioned in every major publication, but somehow it still felt surreal. Starting with nothing but a laptop and an idea, she built an investment firm that has funded 43 successful startups, created over 10,000 jobs, and generated returns that redefined industry standards. Marcus was gripping his water glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. Vivian was typing frantically on her phone, probably trying to manage the crisis that had become their daily reality. The Chen family's investment firm was 3 months behind on office rent, and everyone in the industry knew it. Her portfolio includes some of the most successful companies of the decade, and her mentorship programs have launched hundreds of careers for underrepresented entrepreneurs who were ignored by traditional venture capital. The cameras had found me in the audience, my face appearing on the massive screens throughout the ballroom. I kept my expression neutral, professional, but inside I was remembering the girl who used to practice investor pitches in the mirror of a shared bathroom in a house with 4 roommates. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in congratulating this year's Visionary Investor Award recipient, Elena Blackwood, founder and CEO of Pinnacle Ventures. The applause was thunderous. 500 of the most successful people in technology were standing, clapping for the woman who'd been told she wasn't smart enough, wasn't connected enough, wasn't rich enough to play in their world. I rose from my seat, smoothing my gown as I made my way toward the stage. Each step felt like validation, like proof that every sacrifice had been worth it. As I passed table 47, I caught fragments of Marcus's whispered conversation with his wife. "This can't be real," he was saying. "She was working retail 3 years ago." "The Johnson deal fell through," Vivian hissed back. "We need to talk to bankruptcy lawyers tomorrow." I continued toward the stage, my heels clicking against the marble floor with the rhythm of inevitability. The spotlight found me as I accepted the Crystal Award, its weight solid and real in my hands. The ballroom fell silent, waiting for my speech. 500 faces turned upward, including the one that had once told me I'd never be more than ordinary. I thought about that conversation, about the choice that had changed everything, about the moment when Marcus decided I wasn't enough. But tonight wasn't about him. Tonight was about the empire I'd built from the ashes of that rejection, about the hundreds of entrepreneurs who'd gotten their first real chance because I believed in them when nobody else would. I stepped up to the podium, looked out at the sea of expectant faces, and began to speak about the future I'd created from the ruins of the past they'd tried to write for me. 4 years earlier, I was living a completely different life. My name was still Elena Martinez then, before I legally changed it to distance myself from the wreckage Marcus would leave behind. I worked as a senior analyst at TechFlow Solutions, a mid-tier consulting firm in downtown San Francisco, making $68,000 a year and thinking I was climbing the ladder to success.
Our apartment in the Mission District was small but cozy, filled with the kind of mismatched furniture you collect when you're building a life together piece by piece. Marcus worked remotely as a freelance blockchain developer, brilliant with code but struggling to find consistent clients. We split everything 50-50, from rent to groceries to the dreams we shared about our future. I loved him completely. Not just the way he could explain complex algorithms over coffee or how he'd spend hours debugging my laptop when it crashed during important presentations. I loved his ambition, his certainty that he was destined for something bigger than the modest life we were building together. "Elena, you're home early," he called from the kitchen when I walked in that Tuesday evening in March. He was cooking pasta, wearing the faded Stanford computer science t-shirt I'd bought him for his birthday. The engagement ring he'd given me 6 months earlier caught the light as I hung up my jacket. "Finished the Morrison report ahead of schedule," I said, kissing his cheek. "Thought we could work on wedding planning tonight." We'd been engaged for 6 months, planning a small ceremony for the following spring. Nothing elaborate, just our families and closest friends in Golden Gate Park, followed by dinner at the Italian place where we'd had our first date. Simple, but perfect for us. Marcus had been quiet lately, distracted by something he claimed was just work stress. His freelance projects had been drying up, and I'd been covering more of our expenses without complaint. That's what partners do, I'd told him. We support each other through the rough patches. Actually, he said, not quite meeting my eyes, we need to talk. Something in his tone made me freeze. I'd heard that voice before, during his phone calls with potential clients who were about to reject his proposals. It was the voice of someone preparing to deliver bad news. We sat on the couch I'd found at a thrift store and spent 3 weekends refinishing. Marcus twisted his hands together, a nervous habit he'd developed during his job search. The silence stretched between us until I couldn't stand it anymore. "What's going on?" I asked. He took a breath, looked at me directly for the first time that evening, and said the words that would change everything. "I've been thinking about us, about our future, and I don't think we want the same things." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. The words didn't make sense at first. We'd spent hours talking about our dreams, about the company he wanted to start, about the investment firm I hoped to join someday. We'd planned out everything from our honeymoon destination to the names of our future children. "What do you mean?" I asked. "We've been planning our wedding for months." "Elena, you're incredible. You're smart, driven, supportive, everything a guy could want." The words sounded rehearsed, like he'd practiced them in front of a mirror. "But I need to be practical about my future." Practical. The word hit me like a physical blow. "I've been offered an opportunity," he continued, "a chance to launch my own cryptocurrency startup, but it requires connections I don't have, funding I can't access alone." I felt a flutter of excitement despite the strange tone of this conversation. "That's amazing. You've been wanting to start your own company forever. How can I help? Do you need me to look at business plans or connect you with people at work?" His expression grew more uncomfortable. "It's not that simple. The opportunity comes with certain expectations." "What kind of expectations?" Marcus stood up, walked it to the window that overlooked the street where we'd imagined raising our kids someday. "Vivian Chen's family runs one of the largest venture capital firms in Silicon Valley. Her father wants to back my startup, but only if I'm part of their family ecosystem." I knew the name. Chen Capital had funded some of the biggest tech successes of the past decade. They were old money, the kind of established wealth that opened doors I'd never even known existed. "That's incredible," I said slowly. "What does that mean for us?" He turned around, and I saw the answer in his eyes before he spoke. "Vivian and I have been talking for months. She understands the tech world in ways that would be better for my career." The room went silent, except for the sound of my heart breaking. "You're leaving me for her?" "I'm choosing a future where I can actually build something meaningful," he said, his voice growing defensive. "Elena, you work for a second-tier consulting firm. You don't have connections. You don't come from money. You don't understand how this world really works." Each word was carefully chosen to hurt, designed to make me feel small and insignificant. "I've been supporting you financially for 8 months," I said quietly. "And I'm grateful for that, but gratitude doesn't build companies. Vivian's family can provide seed funding, Series A connections, access to the right investors. They can turn my ideas into a billion-dollar company." "What about love?" I asked, hating how desperate I sounded. Marcus looked at me with something that might have been pity. "Love doesn't pay for development teams or marketing budgets. Love doesn't get you meetings with the partners at Andreessen Horowitz." I stared at the man I'd planned to marry, searching for any trace of the person who used to tell me I was his inspiration, his motivation to dream bigger. But that person was gone, replaced by someone who saw relationships as transactions and people as stepping stones. "I've already moved my things out," he said, gesturing toward the bedroom.
I didn't want to drag this out and make it harder on both of us. That's when I noticed the silence. His laptop wasn't humming from the desk. His coffee mug wasn't in the sink. The apartment already felt hollow, emptied of his presence while I'd been at work, completely unaware that my life was being dismantled.
"The ring," I said numbly, looking down at the modest diamond he'd saved for months to buy. "Keep it," he said. "Consider it the payment for all those months you covered the rent." Payment. As if our entire relationship had been a business arrangement where I'd been the primary investor in a failed startup called Us. "Marcus," I said, as he picked up the single suitcase by the door, "you'll regret this." He paused, hand on the doorknob, and for a moment I thought he might change his mind. Instead, he smiled with the condescending kindness people reserve for children who don't understand adult decisions. "Elena, you're a good person, but good isn't enough in Silicon Valley. Vivian and I are getting married next month. Her father is already setting up office space for my company. By this time next year, I'll be running a multi-million-dollar operation." The door closed behind him with the soft click of finality. I sat alone in our apartment that was now just my apartment, surrounded by the remnants of a future that had been canceled without my consent. The wedding dress hanging in our closet, the deposits we'd made on vendors, the guest list we'd spent weeks perfecting. But more than that, I was surrounded by the sudden realization that the man I'd loved had never actually seen me as anything more than a placeholder until something better came along. And apparently, something better meant someone richer, someone more connected, someone whose value could be measured in stock portfolios and family trust funds. That night, I took off the engagement ring and looked at it for the last time. Tomorrow, I would pawn it and use the money for something Marcus had never believed I was capable of achieving. I was going to prove him wrong about everything. The first month after Marcus left was a masterclass in how quickly your entire world can crumble. I couldn't afford the Mission District apartment on my own, so I moved into a studio in Oakland that smelled like cigarettes and had bars on the windows. The commute to downtown San Francisco took 90 minutes each way on public transit, but it was what I could manage on my salary after paying off the deposits we'd lost on the wedding. My coworkers at TechFlow were kind but awkward about the whole situation. Office gossip travels fast, and everyone knew I'd been left for someone with a more impressive last name. The pitying looks in the break room were almost worse than Marcus's coldness had been. "Elena, you doing okay?" my manager David asked one Thursday afternoon, finding me eating lunch alone at my desk for the third week in a row. "I'm fine," I lied, stabbing at the wilted salad I'd packed from home. Restaurant meals were now a luxury I couldn't afford. "You know, if you need some time off to get your head together, we can arrange something." Time off. As if heartbreak was something you could recover from with a long weekend and some self-care. As if the real problem was my emotional state, and not the fact that I was watching my ex-fiancé's success story unfold in real time across every tech publication in the city. Marcus hadn't just married Vivian Chen quickly. He'd done it with the kind of Silicon Valley spectacle that graces magazine covers. The ceremony was held at the Chen family estate in Palo Alto, with 300 guests, including every major venture capitalist on the West Coast. The photo showed up in TechCrunch's Society section, Marcus beaming in a custom tuxedo that probably cost more than my monthly rent. But worse than the wedding photos was watching his company, Chain Forward, announce its Series A funding just 6 weeks after our breakup. $15 million led by Chen Capital with participation from several top-tier firms. The press release quoted Marcus as a visionary entrepreneur with deep industry connections and a proven track record of innovation. Proven track record. The man who'd been struggling to find freelance clients suddenly had a proven track record because he'd married the right person. I made the mistake of reading the TechCrunch article about Chain Forward's launch while riding the BART train home. The journalist described Marcus as one of Silicon Valley's most promising young executives, backed by the prestigious Chen family's three-decade legacy in venture capital. There was a photo of him shaking hands with Vivian's father in front of a sleek office building in Soma, both of them smiling like they'd just solved world hunger. That night, I lay on the air mattress that served as my bed and stared at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a map of nowhere. My laptop was open beside me, showing my bank account balance, $847. After rent, utilities, and student loan payments, I had exactly $63 left for the rest of the month. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister in Boston. Saw the TechCrunch article. You doing okay? I turned the phone face down without responding. How do you explain to someone that you're not just heartbroken, but professionally humiliated? That every day you're reminded that the person you loved saw you as so fundamentally inadequate that he traded your entire relationship for a better business opportunity? The breaking point came 6 weeks later on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. I was grabbing coffee from the TechFlow break room when I overheard two senior partners discussing a new client. Chen Capital is looking for consulting services for their portfolio companies. Could be huge for us. We're talking about a potential 7-figure contract. Who's the point person? Asked Robert from strategic planning. Marcus Chen Rodriguez, apparently. He's one of their rising stars, married into the family, young guy who really knows crypto space. I nearly dropped my coffee mug. Marcus had hyphenated his name, Marcus Chen Rodriguez. He'd literally rebranded himself as part of the Chen family empire. I've heard good things about him. Forbes named him one of their 30 under 30 in finance last month. Self-made entrepreneur who bootstrapped his way into the venture capital world. Self-made, bootstrapped. I stood frozen in the break room listening to my coworkers praise my ex-fiancé's fabricated origin story while I struggled to afford lunch. That afternoon, I did something I'd been avoiding for months. I looked up Chain Forward's website, really looked at it beyond the slick marketing copy and professional headshots. I studied their business model, their technology stack, their market positioning. I read every press release, every interview, every piece of coverage they had received. And that's when I realized something that changed everything. Their technology wasn't revolutionary. It wasn't even particularly innovative. Chain Forward was essentially repackaging existing blockchain solutions with better marketing and fancier branding. The breakthrough cryptocurrency platform that had impressed investors was built on open-source protocols that any competent developer could implement. Marcus hadn't succeeded because he was brilliant. He'd succeeded because he had access to the right investors, the right connections, the right last name. The technology itself was competent, but unremarkable. But here's what really grabbed my attention. In all my research, I kept finding mentions of other startups that had been passed over by major VCs, companies with genuinely innovative solutions that couldn't get meetings with the big firms, brilliant engineers who were ignored because they didn't have family connections or Ivy League networks. I spent the next 3 days diving deeper, using my consulting firm's database access to research the venture capital landscape. What I found was a systematic pattern of incredible opportunities being overlooked because the entrepreneurs didn't fit Silicon Valley's narrow definition of fundable. There were AI researchers from state universities developing breakthrough machine learning algorithms, software engineers from community colleges building genuinely disruptive platforms, immigrants with advanced degrees working retail jobs while their startup ideas gathered dust because they couldn't get past the gatekeepers.
The more I researched, the more I realized that Marcus had accidentally shown me something profound. Success in Silicon Valley wasn't about having the best ideas. It was about having access to the right rooms, the right conversations, the right family connections. But what if someone changed that equation? What if someone built an investment firm that actually looked for the best ideas regardless of pedigree? That Friday night, I stayed up until 3 a.m. writing a business plan on my laptop. Not for a tech startup, but for an investment firm that would focus on overlooked entrepreneurs with exceptional ideas. A venture capital fund that would make decisions based on potential, not connections. I called it Pinnacle Ventures because I wanted to reach the highest point of an industry that had counted me out. The plan was ambitious to the point of seeming delusional. I had no money, no connections, no experience in venture capital. But I had something Marcus had taught me to value. I had nothing left to lose. The next morning, I took the engagement ring to a pawn shop in downtown Oakland. The owner offered me $800 for a ring Marcus had claimed cost $3,000. I took the money without negotiating. That afternoon, I walked into the fanciest business supply store in San Francisco and spent $200 on professional clothes, business cards, and a portfolio folder. When the cashier asked for my company name for the receipt, I said Pinnacle Ventures, with more confidence than I felt. The remaining $600 went into a business checking account. Pinnacle Ventures officially existed, even if it was just me, a laptop, and a bank balance that wouldn't cover most people's grocery budget. But I had something more valuable than money. I had a clear vision of exactly what I wanted to build, and more importantly, I had the specific knowledge of what I was building it to replace. Marcus had shown me how the system worked, how money and connections could turn mediocre ideas into billion-dollar companies. Now, I was going to use that knowledge to build something that actually mattered. The first step was to find the entrepreneurs everyone else was ignoring. I already knew exactly where to start looking. Finding my first entrepreneur turned out to be easier than I expected, but convincing anyone to take me seriously was a different challenge entirely. I started by attending every free tech meetup in the Bay Area, the kind of events where ambitious developers gathered in cramped coffee shops and community centers, far from the polished conferences where established VCs made their deals. My first breakthrough came at a Saturday morning gathering in a Berkeley makerspace. I was sitting in the back, listening to presentations from local startups, when a soft-spoken woman named Priya Patel took the stage. She was demonstrating an AI-powered medical diagnostic tool that could identify skin cancer with 97% accuracy using just smartphone photos. The room was half empty, maybe 20 people scattered across folding chairs. Priya's presentation was technical, dense with medical terminology that sailed over most of the audience's heads. But I understood enough from my consulting background to recognize something extraordinary. This wasn't just another app. This was technology that could save lives in communities without access to specialized healthcare. After her presentation, I watched the sparse applause die down as people filtered out for coffee breaks. No one approached Priya, who was standing alone beside her laptop, disconnecting cables with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to being overlooked. "That was incredible," I said, walking over. "How long have you been developing this?"
She looked surprised that anyone had noticed. 3 years. I'm a dermatology resident at UCSF, but I've been working on this in my spare time. Have you considered raising capital to scale it? Priya laughed, but not with humor. I've pitched to every VC firm in the city. They always say the same thing. Medical technology is too regulated, too risky, takes too long to monetize. They want the next social media app, not something that might actually help people. I handed her my business card, freshly printed with the Pinnacle Ventures logo I designed myself. I'd like to hear more about your technology. Are you free for coffee next week? That coffee meeting turned into 4 hours of the most fascinating conversation I'd had in months. Priya walked me through her algorithms, her clinical trial plans, her vision for deploying the technology in rural clinics and developing countries. She had everything figured out except the funding. "How much do you need for your next phase?" I asked. "Realistically, $200,000 for clinical trials and FDA preparation. But that's just the beginning. To build this properly, we'd need at least $2 million over 18 months. I nodded like I had any idea where I was going to find $2 million. "Let me review your materials and get back to you." That night, I spread Priya's documents across my studio apartment floor, trying to understand every aspect of her business model. The medical applications were clearly revolutionary, but I needed to figure out how to fund it when my entire investment fund consisted of $600 in a checking account.
The solution came from an unexpected source. My former colleague David mentioned that TechFlow had several clients looking for innovative technology partnerships. Instead of traditional venture capital, what if I structured deals as consulting arrangements that gradually converted to equity? I spent the next 2 weeks crafting a proposal that would make Priya's diagnostic tool the centerpiece of a larger healthcare technology consulting practice. TechFlow's pharmaceutical clients would pay for development services, while Pinnacle Ventures accumulated equity in the underlying technology. It was creative financing born from desperation, but it worked. 3 weeks later, I signed my first investment deal, structured as a $50,000 consulting contract that gave Pinnacle Ventures a 15% stake in Priya's company, Mediscan. But success with one entrepreneur doesn't make you a venture capitalist. It makes you lucky once. My second investment almost destroyed everything I'd built. I met Jake Morrison at a startup pitch competition in downtown San Francisco, where he was demonstrating a cryptocurrency trading platform that promised to democratize high-frequency trading for everyday investors. Jake had the kind of polished presentation that made you want to believe him. Former Goldman Sachs analyst, Wharton MBA, and a pitch deck full of impressive projections and market analysis. He needed $100,000 for a platform launch, and he made it sound like a guaranteed path to millions. I should have done more due diligence. I should have asked harder questions about his track record, his technology, his understanding of regulatory requirements. Instead, I was seduced by the possibility of finding my own Marcus Chen, proving that I could identify promising entrepreneurs just as well as the established firms. I invested $75,000, nearly my entire fund, in Morrison Trading Technologies. 3 months later, Jake disappeared with the money. No platform, no technology, no forwarding address. Just a polished LinkedIn profile that turned out to be largely fabricated, and a bank account emptied by someone who'd spent years perfecting the art of looking successful enough to fool desperate investors. The failure hit me harder than Marcus's betrayal had. This wasn't personal rejection, this was professional incompetence. I'd risked everything on someone I'd barely vetted, and now I had to explain to my consulting clients why their innovative healthcare partnership was suddenly underfunded.
I called Priya on a Tuesday morning, sitting in my car outside the TechFlow office because I couldn't bear to have this conversation anywhere my coworkers might overhear. The Morrison deal fell through, I said. I'm going to have to restructure our arrangement. There was a long pause. Elena, you don't have to explain. I know you're taking risks on people like me. Mediscan can survive with slower funding if it means Pinnacle Ventures stays alive. That conversation taught me something crucial about choosing partners. Priya's willingness to adapt, to prioritize long-term success over immediate gains, was exactly the kind of thinking that separates successful entrepreneurs from people who just want quick money. Over the next 6 months, I rebuilt Pinnacle Ventures one careful decision at a time. I developed a rigorous vetting process, spending weeks researching every entrepreneur's background, technology, and market opportunity. I structured smaller initial investments with clear milestones and performance benchmarks. Most importantly, I started building relationships with people who shared my vision of finding overlooked talent. Sarah Kim, a patent attorney who specialized in protecting innovations from underrepresented inventors. Michael Torres, an accountant who helped immigrant entrepreneurs navigate business formation. Lisa Zhang, a marketing consultant who understood how to build brands without Silicon Valley budgets. None of us had traditional venture capital backgrounds, but we all understood what it felt like to be counted out by the established system. We formed an informal network, sharing deal flow and insights, helping each other identify opportunities that the big firms missed. By the end of my first year, Pinnacle Ventures had made investments in 8 companies,
Not all of them succeeded, but the ones that did were starting to show remarkable returns. Priya's Mediscan completed successful clinical trials and was approved for use in 3 states. A sustainable packaging startup founded by 2 community college graduates landed a major contract with Whole Foods. A cybersecurity platform developed by a former refugee was adopted by 12 Fortune 500 companies. My portfolio was still small compared to the established firms, but it was generating the kind of returns that made people in the industry take notice. More importantly, it was proving that exceptional entrepreneurs existed everywhere if you knew how to find them and had the patience to support their growth. The breakthrough moment came during my second year, when Mediscan was acquired by Johnson & Johnson for $42 million. Pinnacle Ventures' equity stake generated a $6 million return on our original $50,000 investment. Suddenly, I wasn't just another consultant playing at venture capital. I was someone who'd identified and nurtured a genuinely transformative company that multinational corporations were fighting to acquire. The acquisition announcement made it into TechCrunch. A brief mention that emerging VC firm Pinnacle Ventures had been an early backer of the innovative healthcare technology. It was the first time my name appeared in a major industry publication, and I saved the screenshot like it was a diploma. But the real validation came 3 days later when my phone rang with a call from Chen Capital. "Ms. Martinez," said the voice on the other end, "this is Jonathan Chen. I understand you've been making some very impressive investments. We'd like to discuss a potential partnership opportunity." Vivian's father wanted to meet with me. The head of the venture capital empire that had funded Marcus's rise to prominence was asking for a conversation with the woman Marcus had deemed too unconnected to matter.
I scheduled the meeting for the following week, then sat in my studio apartment that night, looking at how far I'd traveled from the broken woman who'd pawned her engagement ring 2 years earlier. But this wasn't about proving myself to the Chen family or getting their approval. This was about building something that would outlast every person who'd ever counted me out. The meeting would be interesting, but Pinnacle Ventures didn't need Chen Capital's validation anymore. We were creating our own definition of success. The Chen Capital offices occupied 3 floors of a glass tower in Palo Alto, the kind of building where the elevator buttons are made of brushed steel and the lobby features rotating art installations worth more than most people's houses. I arrived 15 minutes early wearing the most expensive suit I'd ever owned, a charcoal gray Armani that had cost me $3,000, but was essential armor for this particular battle. Jonathan Chen's assistant led me through corridors lined with framed magazine covers featuring Chen Capital's portfolio companies. I recognized most of them, unicorn startups that had redefined entire industries, household name apps used by billions of people, technology platforms that had fundamentally changed how the world worked. And there, prominently displayed near the conference room, was a TechCrunch cover featuring Marcus and Vivian at their wedding, with the headline, "Silicon Valley's Power Couple: How Marriage and Money Are Reshaping Tech Investing." "Miss Martinez," Jonathan Chen rose from the head of a polished conference table that could have seated 20 people. He was smaller than I'd expected, with the kind of understated elegance that only comes from generational wealth. His handshake was firm but brief, a businessman's assessment disguised as politeness. "Mr. Chen, thank you for taking the time to meet with me. Please, sit. I've been following Pinnacle Ventures with great interest." He gestured to a chair halfway down the table, a subtle power play that put distance between us while keeping him in the dominant position. The Mediscan acquisition was particularly impressive. $42 million for a company most VCs wouldn't have touched? I settled into the chair, placing my portfolio folder on the table with deliberate confidence. I find that the best opportunities often exist where others refuse to look. "Indeed," Chen smiled, but his eyes remained calculating. Which brings me to why I wanted to meet. Chen Capital is expanding our early-stage investment practice, and we're looking for partners who understand overlooked markets. The irony was so thick I almost laughed. The man whose firm had built its reputation on backing safe, connected entrepreneurs was now interested in my approach precisely because it was different from theirs. "What kind of partnership are you envisioning?" I asked. "A fund-of-funds arrangement.
Chen Capital would provide significant capital backing for Pinnacle Ventures investments in exchange for preferred returns and strategic oversight. We're talking about scaling your operation from millions to hundreds of millions. Hundreds of millions. The number hung in the air between us like a test. This was the kind of offer that could transform Pinnacle Ventures overnight, catapulting us into the major leagues of venture capital. That's certainly an intriguing proposition, I said carefully. What would strategic oversight entail? Nothing too restrictive. Joint review of investment decisions above a certain threshold, access to our due diligence resources, introduction to our network of limited partners and co-investors. Translation, they wanted control over my deal flow while taking credit for my successes. It was exactly the kind of arrangement that would make me dependent on their approval, turning Pinnacle Ventures into another subsidiary of the Chen Capital empire. I appreciate the offer, I said, closing my portfolio folder, but I'm not interested in strategic oversight from anyone. Pinnacle Ventures succeeds precisely because we make decisions others won't make.
Chen's smile didn't waver, but something shifted behind his eyes. Ms. Martinez, I think you may be underestimating the value of what we're offering. Access to our network alone is worth more than your current fund size. And I think you may be underestimating the value of independence, Mr. Chen. The entrepreneurs I back don't need your network. They need someone who believes in their potential before it becomes obvious to everyone else. The meeting ended cordially but coolly. Chen walked me to the elevator, making polite small talk about the Bay Area real estate market, but we both knew that Pinnacle Ventures had just rejected Silicon Valley royalty. As the elevator descended, I caught my reflection in the polished steel doors. 2 years ago, I would have accepted Chen's offer without hesitation, grateful for any validation from the established elite. Now, I could see it for what it was, an attempt to co-opt my success and limit my independence. The momentum shift I'd been building was becoming impossible to ignore. 3 days after the Chen Capital meeting, I received a call from Forbes asking to interview me for their annual 30 Under 30 list. A week later, the Wall Street Journal wanted to feature Pinnacle Ventures in an article about innovative investment strategies. But the real turning point came when I got a text from Priya late on a Thursday evening. Turn on Channel 7 News, you need to see this. I was in my new apartment, still modest by Silicon Valley standards, but a vast improvement from the Oakland studio, when the local news segment began. The anchor was discussing a corruption investigation involving several venture capital firms accused of insider trading and discriminatory lending practices. Among the firms being investigated, the anchor continued, is Chen Capital, founded by Jonathan Chen and managed by his son-in-law, Marcus Chen Rodriguez. Federal investigators are examining whether the firm used privileged information to manipulate cryptocurrency markets through its portfolio company, ChainForward. My heart stopped. The screen showed footage of federal agents carrying boxes out of ChainForward's Soma office building, the same sleek space where Marcus had posed for his TechCrunch photo op. The investigation had been brewing for months, triggered by suspicious trading patterns in the cryptocurrency markets that ChainForward operated in. Someone had noticed that certain trades seemed to anticipate regulatory announcements and market movements with impossible accuracy. Marcus's breakthrough cryptocurrency platform wasn't just built on existing technology, it was being used to manipulate markets using inside information from Chen Capital's extensive network of regulatory contacts and portfolio companies. Over the next several days, the story exploded across every major business publication. The SEC filed formal charges against ChainForward for securities fraud. Chen Capital was facing potential criminal charges for orchestrating the scheme. Marcus, as ChainForward's CEO, was personally named in multiple federal lawsuits. The man who'd left me for financial security had built his empire on criminal fraud, and now the entire structure was collapsing under federal investigation. But the investigation revealed something even more damaging to Marcus personally. Court documents showed that he'd been siphoning money from ChainForward's accounts to fund his lifestyle, including the Palo Alto mansion he shared with Vivian and the collection of luxury cars that had made him a fixture in Silicon Valley society pages. The money he'd stolen wasn't just from Chen Capital. It belonged to the pension funds, university endowments, and charitable foundations that had invested in ChainForward believing it was a legitimate technology company.
Vivian filed for divorce 6 weeks later. The court papers, which became public record, revealed that she was seeking to protect her family's assets from Marcus's criminal liability. The woman he'd married for her money was cutting ties to save herself from his fraud. My phone rang constantly during this period, with reporters wanting commentary on the Chen Capital scandal and my relationship to the key players. I declined most interviews, but I did agree to speak with the Wall Street Journal about the broader implications for venture capital.
The Chen Capital situation demonstrates why the venture capital industry needs more diverse perspectives, I told the reporter. When investment decisions are made by insular networks focused on connections rather than merit, you create environments where fraud can flourish undetected. You turned down a partnership offer from Chen Capital earlier this year. In retrospect, how do you feel about that decision? I feel grateful that Pinnacle Ventures remained independent. Our due diligence process would have identified the irregularities in Chain Forward's business model because we focus on understanding technology rather than just evaluating relationships. The article ran with the headline, "How Independent VCs Are Disrupting Silicon Valley's Old Boys Network." It featured a full-page photo of me in my office surrounded by profiles of the entrepreneurs Pinnacle Ventures had backed. That same week, I received 3 acquisition offers from major investment firms wanting to buy Pinnacle Ventures. The smallest offer was for $80 million, nearly 4 times what my entire portfolio had been worth just 6 months earlier. I declined all of them. The recognition was gratifying, but more importantly, it was validation of everything I'd been building. While Marcus had been using fraud and family connections to create artificial success, I'd been identifying genuinely innovative entrepreneurs and helping them build sustainable companies. The contrast became even more stark when several of Marcus's former employees reached out to me directly. They'd been skilled developers and analysts who joined Chain Forward believing in the technology, only to discover they were unknowing participants in a criminal enterprise. "We thought we were building something revolutionary," one former Chain Forward engineer told me over coffee. "Marcus convinced us that the trading advantages came from superior algorithms, not insider information. We should have asked harder questions." I ended up hiring 3 former Chain Forward employees for Pinnacle Ventures, partly because they were talented and partly because they understood firsthand the importance of ethical business practices. By the end of that year, Pinnacle Ventures was managing $47 million across 15 portfolio companies. Our average return was 340% compared to the industry average of 180%. We'd been featured in Harvard Business Review as an example of how venture capital could be both profitable and socially responsible. But the most satisfying moment came during the Tech Vision Awards nomination process. I was reviewing the list of finalists when I saw my name listed for Visionary Investor of the Year, the same category that Marcus had probably imagined winning someday. The nominees list also revealed something else. Marcus wasn't nominated for anything. Chain Forward had been delisted from all major industry recognition programs following the federal investigation. His name had been systematically removed from the Silicon Valley success story he'd tried to write for himself. Justice, I realized, wasn't just about succeeding despite someone's betrayal. Sometimes it was about watching them destroy themselves while you built something authentic and lasting. The awards ceremony was still months away, but I already knew that walking into that ballroom would represent more than just personal vindication. It would demonstrate that the entire system Marcus had used to justify leaving me, the belief that connections mattered more than character, that money was more important than merit, was fundamentally corrupt. I'd built something better from the ground up, and now the whole industry was taking notice. The recognition felt good, but the real satisfaction was knowing that hundreds of entrepreneurs were building successful companies because someone had finally looked beyond their pedigree to see their potential. That was worth more than all the awards and acquisition offers in the world. The Tech Vision Awards ceremony brought us full circle to that Beverly Hills hotel ballroom, but standing at the podium with the Crystal Award in my hands, I could feel the weight of every decision that had led to this moment. The spotlight was warm, but not as warm as the satisfaction of seeing Marcus's pale face in the audience, his obvious discomfort a stark contrast to the confident man who'd once dismissed my potential as inadequate for his ambitions. Thank you. I began, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was about to reveal. 5 years ago, I learned the most valuable lesson of my career, that being told you're not enough is often the beginning of discovering you're more than anyone imagined. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. They all knew the backstory, the industry's golden girl who'd risen from nothing to reshape venture capital. But what they didn't know was the scope of what I'd been building while they were focused on surface success. Tonight, I want to share 3 announcements that represent not just Pinnacle Ventures' growth, but a fundamental shift in how we think about innovation and opportunity in Silicon Valley. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat at table 47. He'd been struggling to maintain his composure since the moment I'd been announced as the winner, but now he looked genuinely afraid of what was coming next. The first announcement concerns market expansion, I continued, watching several tech journalists in the front row lean forward with their phones ready. This afternoon, Pinnacle Ventures completed the acquisition of Peterson Technologies for $200 million, making it the largest single transaction in our firm's history. The room erupted in applause. Peterson Technologies was the AI healthcare company that had revolutionized emergency room diagnostics. Ironically, one of Chain Forward's competitors before Marcus's company collapsed under federal investigation. But Peterson isn't just joining our portfolio, I said, letting the applause die down. They're becoming the cornerstone of our new healthcare innovation division, which will focus exclusively on medical technology companies that prioritize patient outcomes over profit margins. This was information that hadn't been released to the press yet. I was using the awards ceremony to announce a strategic pivot that would position Pinnacle Ventures as the dominant player in ethical healthcare investing. Marcus was gripping his water glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. Peterson Technologies had been developed by entrepreneurs he'd met during his Chain Forward days, brilliant researchers who'd approached him for funding only to be dismissed because their technology was too altruistic for serious investors. The second announcement addresses a systemic problem in venture capital. For too long, this industry has operated like an exclusive club, where access to funding depends more on family connections than revolutionary ideas. I could see several established VCs in the audience nodding along, probably thinking I was about to praise their commitment to diversity and inclusion. They had no idea what was actually coming. That's why Pinnacle Ventures is launching the Innovation Access Initiative, a $50 million fund specifically designed to back entrepreneurs who have been systematically excluded from traditional venture capital. The applause was immediate and enthusiastic, but I raised my hand to indicate I wasn't finished. The Innovation Access Initiative will not just provide funding, but comprehensive support systems, including legal assistance, marketing guidance, and access to distribution networks that have historically been available only to entrepreneurs with elite university connections. Marcus was now furiously typing on his phone, probably trying to reach his bankruptcy attorney about whether this announcement would affect his ongoing federal case. He understood that I was essentially announcing the creation of a parallel venture capital ecosystem designed to compete directly with the traditional model he'd tried to exploit. But the third announcement is the most important, I said, my voice carrying across the silent ballroom, because it demonstrates that sometimes the best way to honor an industry's potential is to completely reimagine its foundations. I paused, finding Marcus's eyes in the crowd. He looked like a man watching his execution being announced. Earlier today, Pinnacle Ventures completed the acquisition of Chain Forward's remaining technology assets, purchased from the federal bankruptcy trustee for $12 million. The room exploded in murmurs. Everyone knew that Chain Forward was Marcus's failed cryptocurrency company, the criminal enterprise that had destroyed his reputation and led to ongoing federal prosecution. These assets include Chain Forward's proprietary blockchain technologies, their customer database, their intellectual property portfolio, and their former headquarters building in Soma. Marcus looked like he was about to be physically sick. I was announcing that I now owned every tangible remnant of his fraudulent empire, the technology he'd helped develop,
the office where he'd planned his schemes, even the customer relationships he'd violated through market manipulation. The chain-forward technology, stripped of its fraudulent applications, actually contains valuable innovations that can be repurposed for legitimate blockchain security applications, I continued. These systems will be integrated into our cybersecurity portfolio, where they'll be used to detect and prevent exactly the kind of market manipulation that destroyed their original implementation. The irony was overwhelming. The technology Marcus had corrupted for criminal purposes would now be used to protect other entrepreneurs from making his mistakes. More importantly, I said, Kane Forward's former headquarters will become the Innovation Access Initiative's primary campus. We're converting their former trading floor into a collaborative workspace for entrepreneurs who are building ethical, sustainable technology companies. Marcus finally pushed back from his table and stumbled toward the exit, unable to sit through any more announcements about how his failed empire was being transformed into something meaningful. But I wasn't finished. The Innovation Access Initiative represents more than just an investment fund, I called out, my voice stopping Marcus halfway to the door. It represents a fundamental question about what we value in Silicon Valley. Do we value connections or competence, pedigree or performance, artificial prominence or authentic innovation? Marcus was trapped between his table and the exit, forced to stand in the middle of the ballroom while I systematically dismantled every assumption he'd made about success and value. 5 years ago, I was told that I wasn't connected enough, wasn't wealthy enough, wasn't sophisticated enough to succeed in venture capital. Tonight, I'm announcing investments and acquisitions totaling over $250 million, funding for entrepreneurs who have been told the same thing. The standing ovations started spontaneously, spreading through the ballroom like wildfire. 500 of the most successful people in technology were applauding not just my success, but the systematic rejection of the exclusionary practices that had defined their industry for decades.
To every entrepreneur watching tonight who has been dismissed because of their background, their education, or their connections, I said over the applause, remember that authenticity always outlasts manipulation, that merit always defeats fraud, and that sometimes being told you're not enough is the motivation you need to become more than anyone thought possible. Marcus finally made it to the exit, but the damage was done. Every major tech publication would be covering tonight's announcements, and his name would be mentioned in every article as the cautionary tale that had inspired my approach to ethical investing. As I left the stage, I was immediately surrounded by entrepreneurs, investors, and journalists wanting to discuss partnerships, interviews, and opportunities. But the most meaningful moment came when I spotted familiar faces in the crowd. Entrepreneurs from my portfolio companies who had driven down from the Bay Area to witness this announcement. Elena! Priya pushed through the crowd, her eyes bright with excitement. Mediscan's entire team was watching the live stream. This is incredible! You're not just changing venture capital, you're changing the entire tech ecosystem. Behind her were dozens of other entrepreneurs whose companies I'd backed over the years, software developers who'd been told their ideas weren't scalable enough for serious investment, immigrants who'd built revolutionary platforms while working multiple jobs to support their families, women who'd been dismissed because their industries weren't disruptive enough for Silicon Valley's taste. They were all successful now, running companies that employed thousands of people and generated hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. But more importantly, they represented proof that a different model of entrepreneurship was not only possible, but superior to the traditional approach. The Innovation Access Initiative is going to change everything, said Maria Santos, whose sustainable packaging company had just landed a major contract with Amazon. My cousin in Phoenix has been trying to get funding for her clean energy startup for 2 years. Traditional VCs keep telling her that renewable energy is too regulated, too complicated, too risky.
Send me her information, I replied. That's exactly the kind of systematic oversight we're designed to address. The after-party was in full swing when Jennifer approached with news that would put the final punctuation mark on the evening. Elena, you need to see this, she said, handing me her phone. It just broke on TechCrunch. The headline read, Marcus Chen Rodriguez arrested on additional federal charges, personal bankruptcy filed. The article revealed that Marcus's legal troubles had escalated far beyond the original chain-forward fraud. Federal investigators had discovered that he'd been running a parallel cryptocurrency scheme using his marriage to Vivian as cover for laundering money through offshore accounts connected to Chen Capital. The new charges included money laundering, tax evasion, and wire fraud, carrying potential prison sentences of 20 to 25 years. His personal assets, including the Palo Alto mansion and luxury car collection that had symbolized his artificial success, had been seized by federal marshals that afternoon. There's more, Jennifer said quietly. The bankruptcy filing shows debts of over $40 million, mostly legal fees and restitution to defrauded investors. His listed assets are worth less than $60,000. The man who'd left me because I wasn't financially secure enough was now facing complete financial ruin and decades in federal prison for the very schemes he'd used to create his artificial wealth.
But the most devastating detail was buried in the article's final paragraphs. Marcus had been arrested at a budget motel in Fresno, where he'd been hiding since his divorce from Vivian was finalized. Federal agents found him with less than $400 in cash and a prepaid cell phone, completely cut off from the network of wealth and privilege he'd sacrificed everything to join. The contrast was so complete, it felt surreal. While I was announcing $250 acquisitions at the industry's most prestigious awards ceremony, Marcus was being booked into federal custody at a county jail, facing the prospect of spending the rest of his career in prison. Should I prepare a statement for the press? Jennifer asked. No, I replied, handing back her phone. Tonight is about the future we're building, not the past we're leaving behind. But privately, I felt a profound sense of completion, not satisfaction at Marcus's downfall. That felt too small for the magnitude of what I'd built. Instead, I felt grateful that his betrayal had forced me to discover capabilities I'd never known I possessed. The evening's final validation came when Jonathan Chen, Vivian's father, approached me at the bar where I was having a quiet conversation with several Innovation Access Initiative supporters. Miss Blackwood, he said, his voice carrying none of the condescension I remembered from our meeting 2 years earlier. I wanted to congratulate you on tonight's announcements. What you've built is remarkable. Jonathan looked like he'd aged significantly since Chen Capital's federal investigation began. His expensive suit couldn't hide the stress lines around his eyes or the way his hands trembled slightly when he spoke. Thank you, Mr. Chen. I hope your family is managing the current difficulties as well as possible. That's actually why I wanted to speak with you, he said quietly. Vivian asked me to convey her personal congratulations. She's been following Pinnacle Ventures' success, and she wanted you to know that she's grateful for how you've handled the situation with Marcus. This was unexpected. Vivian and I had never been friends. We'd been rivals for the same man's attention, and she'd won through superior financial resources. But apparently, she understood that Marcus had manipulated both of us, just in different ways. Vivian has returned to school, Jonathan continued. She's studying nonprofit management at Berkeley, focusing on microfinance for women entrepreneurs in developing countries. She wants to use what's left of our family's resources to create opportunities for others. The irony was poetic. The woman Marcus had married for her money was now dedicating her wealth to helping other women achieve the kind of independence that neither of us had possessed when we were competing for his attention. I'm glad to hear that, I said sincerely. Please tell her that I wish her success in that work. I will, he replied. And, Miss Blackwood, what you said tonight about authenticity outlasting manipulation, Vivian wanted you to know that she's learned the same lesson, just from a different perspective.
As the evening wound down, I stood on the hotel's terrace looking out at the lights of Beverly Hills, thinking about the complete transformation of relationships and power dynamics that had brought me to this moment. 4 years ago, I'd been devastated by rejection, convinced that my worth was determined by someone else's willingness to invest in my potential. Tonight, I controlled nearly $300 million in assets, employed over 400 people across my portfolio companies, and fundamentally altered how the venture capital industry thought about identifying and supporting entrepreneurial talent. But more than that, I'd proven that character mattered more than connections, that authentic innovation beat artificial manipulation, and that sometimes the best response to betrayal wasn't revenge. It was building something so much better that the betrayal became irrelevant to your success. Marcus had taught me to measure worth by external validation and financial security. Now I understood that real success meant creating value that transcended any individual relationship or business transaction.
Tomorrow, I would begin the work of implementing the Innovation Access Initiative, of transforming Chain Forward's former headquarters into a launching pad for ethical entrepreneurship, of proving that venture capital could be both profitable and socially responsible. But tonight, I simply appreciated how far I'd traveled from that broken woman in Oakland to the entrepreneur who just announced a $250 million initiative to democratize access to startup funding. The journey had been longer and more difficult than I could have imagined when I pawned that engagement ring 4 years earlier. But it had led to something more meaningful than I'd ever dreamed possible when I was measuring my worth by someone else's definition of success. Sometimes the best things in life come from the worst moments, if you have the courage to build something authentic from the wreckage of what was artificial. 6 months after the Tech Vision Awards, I stood in what used to be Chain Forward's executive conference room, watching contractors install the final elements of the Innovation Access Initiative headquarters. The space had been completely transformed from Marcus's monument to artificial success into something that represented authentic opportunity. Where Marcus had once hung expensive art chosen by interior designers, we now displayed patents and prototypes from entrepreneurs who'd been told their ideas weren't sophisticated enough for serious investors. The imposing mahogany conference table, where he'd planned his fraudulent schemes, had been replaced with modular workspace furniture that could be reconfigured for everything from coding sessions to legal consultations. "The final numbers are incredible," said David Park, the former patent attorney who now served as the Innovation Access Initiative's director. "We've funded 63 companies in the first 6 months, with an average initial investment of $400,000. The combined valuation of these startups has already exceeded $200 million. But the statistics that mattered most to me weren't financial. We'd created over 1,500 jobs for people who'd been systematically excluded from traditional tech employment. 47% of our entrepreneurs were women, 38% were immigrants or first-generation Americans, 29% were from communities of color that had historically been shut out of venture capital. More importantly, David continued, we're seeing breakthrough innovations that the traditional VC firms completely missed. The refugee engineer who developed revolutionary water purification technology, the community college dropout who created an AI system that's revolutionizing special education, the single mother who built a platform that eliminated food waste in over 300 restaurants. These were the entrepreneurs that Marcus and his peers would have dismissed without a second thought. Too risky, too unconventional, too far outside the narrow parameters of Silicon Valley's traditional investment thesis. But they were building companies that solved real problems for real people, creating sustainable value instead of chasing the latest market bubble. My phone buzzed with the text from Jennifer. Marcus sentencing hearing scheduled for next month. 22-year sentence recommended by federal prosecutors. 22 years. Marcus would be in his 50s when he was released, assuming he served the full sentence. The man who left me because he needed a more advantageous financial arrangement would spend the prime years of his career in federal prison. I deleted the text without responding.
Marcus's fate was no longer relevant to my future. The real measure of how far I'd traveled came that afternoon when I received an unexpected visitor at the Innovation Access Initiative headquarters. "Ms. Blackwood," the security guard's voice came through my office intercom. "There's a Jonathan Chen here to see you. He says it's urgent."
Vivian's father. I hadn't spoken to him since rejecting his partnership proposal 2 years earlier, back when Chen Capital was still a functioning venture capital firm instead of a cautionary tale about regulatory compliance. "Send him up," I said. Jonathan Chen looked like he'd aged a decade in the past 2 years. His expensive suit couldn't hide the stress lines around his eyes, or the way his hands shook slightly when he sat down across from my desk. "Miss Blackwood?" he began, his voice carrying none of the confidence I remembered from our previous meeting. "Thank you for seeing me. I know this is unusual." "Mr. Chen, I was sorry to hear about Chen Capital's situation." This was a diplomatic understatement. Chen Capital had been forced into controlled liquidation after the federal investigation revealed systematic violations of securities regulations spanning over a decade. "That's actually why I'm here," he said. "My family is facing significant financial difficulties as a result of the investigation. Our assets had been frozen, and we're looking at potential criminal charges related to our oversight of portfolio companies." I waited for him to continue, unsure where this conversation was headed. "I wanted to ask if you might consider acquiring some of Chen Capital's remaining assets," he said quietly. "We have office space, investor relationships, and several portfolio companies that might be valuable to Pinnacle Ventures." The irony was so complete it almost felt scripted. The man who'd once offered to rescue my small investment firm with his family's vast resources was now asking me to rescue his family's empire from federal prosecution. "That's an interesting proposition," I said carefully. "What specific assets are you referring to?" "Our Palo Alto headquarters building, several early-stage portfolio companies that weren't involved in the Chain Forward scandal, and our limited partner network, which includes some of the most sophisticated institutional investors in the world." I could see the desperation behind his careful businessman's demeanor. This wasn't just about saving assets. It was about preserving some vestige of the Chen family's reputation in Silicon Valley. "Mr. Chen," I said, "I appreciate you thinking of Pinnacle Ventures, but I need to understand something. 2 years ago, you offered me a partnership because you wanted access to my deal flow. Today, you're offering to sell me your assets because you need my capital. What's changed?" He was quiet for a long moment, looking out the window at the Soma district where his son-in-law had once pretended to be a legitimate businessman. "What's changed," he said finally, "is that I've learned the difference between sustainable success and artificial prominence. You built something real, while we were chasing market manipulation and regulatory arbitrage." It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to get from a man who'd spent decades believing that connections mattered more than character. "I'll have my team review the assets, but any acquisition would need to include provisions for the employees and portfolio companies that weren't involved in the fraud. I won't profit from other people's misfortune." "Of course," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Whatever terms you think are fair." After he left, I sat in my office thinking about the complete reversal of power dynamics that had brought Jonathan Chen to my door as a supplicant rather than a potential partner. But more importantly, I thought about the responsibility that came with the influence I had accumulated. Pinnacle Ventures now controlled nearly $400 million in assets. The Innovation Access Initiative was on track to fund over 200 companies in its first year. I had the ability to shape how an entire generation of entrepreneurs would build their businesses. That responsibility crystallized into action 3 weeks later when I announced Pinnacle Ventures' most ambitious project yet, the Ethical Technology Accelerator.
Traditional business education focuses on maximizing profits and market share, I told the audience of 600 entrepreneurs, investors, and academics gathered at Stanford's Graduate School of Business. But the next generation of business leaders needs to understand how to build companies that generate sustainable value for all stakeholders. The Ethical Technology Accelerator wasn't just another startup incubator. It was a comprehensive program that would teach entrepreneurs how to build companies that balanced profitability with social responsibility, that created value rather than extracting it, that solved problems instead of exploiting them. We'll provide 6 months of intensive training in ethical business practices, sustainable technology development, and stakeholder-centered management, I continued. But more importantly, we'll provide access to a network of investors, mentors, and partners who share these values. The program would be free for participants, funded entirely by profits from Pinnacle Ventures' successful investments. We'd select 100 entrepreneurs per year from a global applicant pool with a specific focus on underrepresented communities and overlooked markets. Because the future of technology isn't just about building faster computers or more efficient algorithms. It's about ensuring that innovation serves humanity rather than exploiting it. The announcement generated significant media coverage, but the response that mattered most came from an unexpected source. 2 days after the Stanford presentation, I received a handwritten letter from Elena Martinez, the woman I used to be before I legally changed my name to distance myself from Marcus's betrayal. The letter had been forwarded from my old address, written by my former landlord who'd been tracking my success in the business press. "Dear Elena," the letter began, "you probably don't remember me, but I was your neighbor in the Oakland studio apartment building 4 years ago. I watched you leave for work every morning carrying the weight of heartbreak and determination in equal measure. I'm writing to tell you that your story gave my daughter the courage to start her own business. She's a software engineer who was told by multiple investors that her idea for improving accessibility in mobile apps wasn't commercially viable. But she remembered reading about your success and decided to pursue it anyway. Her company now employs 47 people and has partnerships with Apple and Google to integrate accessibility features across their platforms. Thank you for proving that sometimes the best way to heal from betrayal is to build something so meaningful that the betrayal becomes irrelevant." I read the letter 3 times, thinking about the woman I'd been in that Oakland studio apartment building. She'd felt broken and discarded, convinced that her worth was determined by someone else's willingness to invest in her potential. Now I understood that Marcus's rejection had been the greatest gift he could have given me, because it forced me to discover what I was actually capable of achieving. The following month brought news that provided the final punctuation mark on this chapter of my life. Marcus was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for securities fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. The judge described his crimes as a systematic betrayal of the trust that makes financial markets possible. Vivian, meanwhile, had rebuilt her life completely. She'd returned to school to study nonprofit management and was now running a foundation that provided microloans to women entrepreneurs in developing countries. She'd chosen to use her family's remaining resources to create opportunities for others, rather than preserve her own privilege. She stopped by the office last week, Jennifer told me as we reviewed the quarterly portfolio reports. She wanted to thank you for handling the Chen Capital acquisition ethically. Her father kept his house because you structured the deal to protect non-culpable family members. That decision had cost Pinnacle Ventures approximately $12 million in potential profits, but it had been the right thing to do. Vivian had been manipulated by Marcus just as much as I had, and she deserved the chance to rebuild her life without carrying the full weight of his crimes.
The final validation came 6 months later when Harvard Business School invited me to teach a case study based on Pinnacle Ventures' approach to ethical investing. The case study would be used in MBA programs across the country to teach future business leaders about stakeholder capitalism and sustainable value creation. The Elena Blackwood case, Building Sustainable Venture Capital in Silicon Valley, would examine how Pinnacle Ventures had generated superior returns while maintaining ethical standards, how the Innovation Access Initiative had democratized access to startup funding, and how the Ethical Technology Accelerator was reshaping business education. But more than that, the case study would examine how personal adversity could be transformed into systemic change, how individual success could be leveraged to create opportunities for others, and how authentic values could compete successfully against artificial manipulation.
Standing in my office that evening, looking out at the San Francisco skyline where thousands of entrepreneurs were building the next generation of technology companies, I thought about the woman I'd been 4 years earlier. She'd measured her worth by someone else's definition of value, believing that love and success required external validation. She'd been devastated by rejection because she'd internalized the idea that being chosen by others was more important than choosing herself. Now I understood that the most important relationship in business, as in life, was the one you had with your own values. That sustainable success came from building something meaningful rather than impressive. That the best revenge against people who underestimated you wasn't proving them wrong, it was proving yourself right in ways they'd never imagined possible. Marcus had taught me that some people viewed relationships as transactions, evaluating partners based on their utility rather than their character. But he'd also inadvertently taught me that authenticity always outlasted manipulation, that merit always defeated fraud, and that sometimes being rejected by the wrong person was the first step toward finding the right path. The Innovation Access Initiative now occupied 3 floors of what used to be Chain Forward's headquarters. Every day, dozens of entrepreneurs who'd been dismissed by traditional investors worked on innovations that would improve millions of lives. The Ethical Technology Accelerator had received over 15,000 applications for its second cohort from entrepreneurs in 93 countries who wanted to build companies that balanced profit with purpose. Pinnacle Ventures managed over $600 million in assets, had funded over 200 companies, and maintained an average return rate that exceeded industry standards while adhering to rigorous ethical guidelines. But the metric that mattered most was simpler. We'd created a model that proved business success and moral integrity weren't competing values. We'd demonstrated that the best way to generate sustainable returns was to invest in sustainable solutions. That night, I wrote my own letter, not to Marcus, who was beginning his 18th year of federal incarceration, but to the woman I used to be. Dear Elena, I wrote, the heartbreak you're experiencing isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of something you can't imagine yet. The man who broke your heart did you a favor, though you won't understand that for several years. He showed you that some people love you for what you can do for them rather than who you are. This lesson will save you from wasting decades on the wrong partnerships. More importantly, his rejection will force you to discover what you're capable of building when you stop trying to fit into someone else's definition of success. You're going to build something extraordinary. You're going to create opportunities for hundreds of entrepreneurs who've been told they're not good enough. You're going to prove that character matters more than connections, that authenticity beats manipulation, and that sometimes the best revenge is living so well that revenge becomes irrelevant.
But first, you have to survive the heartbreak. You have to pawn that engagement ring and use the money to build something that matters. You have to stop measuring your worth by someone else's willingness to invest in your potential. Because the most important investment you'll ever make is the one you make in yourself. I sealed the letter without sending it, but kept it in my desk drawer as a reminder of how far the journey had taken me from that broken woman in Oakland to the entrepreneur who'd fundamentally changed how Silicon Valley thought about innovation and opportunity. Tomorrow, I would continue building something that would outlast any individual success or failure, any personal triumph or betrayal. I would continue proving that authentic success was always more satisfying than artificial prominence, and that the best way to heal from rejection was to create something so meaningful that the rejection became the foundation for everything that followed. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.